Have you ever wondered what it takes to push someone who's naturally gentle, caring, and patient to their absolute breaking point? Well, if you've ever seen an INFJ who's finally had enough, you know it's not pretty. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most misunderstood personality types and exploring what happens when their famous tolerance finally snaps. The people-pleasing trap. One of the biggest challenges INFJs face is their tendency to put everyone else's needs before their own. They're natural people pleasers, but not in the superficial way you might think. They genuinely care about making others happy and comfortable. They'll go out of their way to help a friend move, listen to the same relationship problems for the 100th time, or sacrifice their own plans to be there for someone in need. This sounds noble, right? And it is to a point. But here's where it gets tricky. INFJs often struggle with setting boundaries. They'll say yes when they mean no, take on responsibilities that aren't theirs, and ignore their own needs to serve others. They've got this internal compass that tells them helping others is the right thing to do, even when it's slowly draining their energy. The problem is that many people don't realize how much INFJs are sacrificing. Since they're so good at hiding their own struggles, others might assume they're just naturally giving and don't need anything in return. This creates a cycle where INFJs give more and more while receiving less and less appreciation or reciprocation. The silent suffering phase. When INFJs start feeling overwhelmed, they don't usually announce it to the world. Instead, they enter what I call the silent suffering phase. During this time, they're still functioning normally on the outside, but internally, they're struggling with feelings of resentment, exhaustion, and loneliness. They might start having thoughts like, "No one really cares about me," or "I'm always there for others, but who's there for me?" These thoughts are painful for INFJs because they conflict with their natural desire to be selfless and caring. They feel guilty for having these feelings, which only makes things worse. During this phase, INFJs often try to rationalize their situation. They'll tell themselves things like, "It's not that bad," or "I'm just being sensitive." They might even increase their efforts to help others, thinking that if they just give a little more, they'll feel better about themselves. Unfortunately, this usually has the opposite effect. The warning signs. When an INFJ is reaching their limit, while INFJs are masters at hiding their true feelings, there are subtle signs that they're approaching their breaking point. The first sign is usually withdrawal. An INFJ who's normally responsive to messages might start taking longer to reply. They might decline social invitations or seem less engaged in conversations. Another warning sign is increased irritability. INFJs are typically patient and understanding, but when they're overwhelmed, they might snap at small things that wouldn't normally bother them. They might seem more critical or judgmental than usual, especially toward people who they feel have taken advantage of their kindness. Physical symptoms often appear too. INFJs might experience headaches, fatigue, or other stress-related health issues. They might have trouble sleeping or find themselves getting sick more often. Their body is essentially forcing them to slow down when they won't do it voluntarily. You might also notice changes in their interests and hobbies. An INFJ who usually loves reading might stop picking up books. Someone who enjoys creative pursuits might abandon their projects. They lose interest in the things that normally bring them joy because they're too emotionally drained to engage with them. The internal storm. What's really going on inside the mind of an INFJ who's had enough? There's a complex storm of emotions brewing. They're dealing with anger, which is particularly difficult for them because they don't see themselves as angry people. They're experiencing deep disappointment in the people they've trusted and supported. There's also a profound sense of loneliness. Despite being surrounded by people they've helped and cared for, they feel completely alone. They realize that many of their relationships are one-sided, and this recognition is devastating for someone who values authentic connection so deeply. Guilt is another major component of their internal struggle. INFJs feel guilty for feeling angry, guilty for wanting to prioritize their own needs, and guilty for considering stepping back from their helper role. This guilt can be paralyzing because it goes against their core identity as caring, selfless individuals. They're also grappling with a loss of identity. If they're not the person everyone turns to for help, who are they? This existential question can be terrifying for INFJs who have defined themselves by their ability to support others. The breaking point. When enough is enough. The moment an INFJ finally reaches their breaking point is often triggered by a specific incident, but it's really the culmination of years of unrecognized sacrifice and unmet needs. It might be a friend who cancels plans at the last minute for the 10th time, a family member who criticizes them after they've bent over backward to help, or a colleague who takes credit for their work. Whatever the trigger, it's usually something that would seem relatively minor to an outside observer. But for the INFJ, it's the final straw that breaks the camel's back. All of those suppressed feelings suddenly surge to the surface, and they can't contain them anymore. This moment is often characterized by a sudden clarity. The INFJ sees their situation with startling objectivity. They realize how much they've been taken for granted, how little appreciation they've received, and how unhealthy their patterns have become. It's like waking up from a dream and seeing reality for the first time. The door slam. The INFJ's nuclear option. When INFJs have truly had enough, they often resort to what's known in personality psychology circles as the door slam. This isn't a gentle closing of a door. It's a complete and permanent severing of a relationship. One day, someone who has been a significant part of the INFJ's life simply ceases to exist for them. The door slam isn't done out of spite or revenge, though it might look that way from the outside. It's actually a protective mechanism. The INFJ has determined that the relationship is too toxic or draining to continue, and they're protecting their mental and emotional health by cutting it off completely. What makes the door slam particularly jarring is how sudden it can seem to the other person. They might have no idea that the INFJ was struggling or feeling unappreciated. From their perspective, everything was fine, and then suddenly the INFJ is gone. Phone calls go unanswered, messages are ignored, and attempts to reconcile are met with cold silence. The door slam is typically irreversible. Unlike other personality types who might cool off and eventually reconcile, INFJs rarely reopen doors they've slammed shut. They've made a careful, considered decision that the relationship is unhealthy for them, and they stick to it. The boundary revolution. Setting limits for the first time. When INFJs finally say enough, they often undergo what I call a boundary revolution. For the first time in their lives, they start saying no without feeling guilty about it. They begin to prioritize their own needs and well-being over their desire to please others. This change can be shocking to people who are used to the INFJ's endless availability and willingness to help. Suddenly, the person who was always there for them is setting limits and enforcing them. Friends and family members might feel confused or even betrayed by this new behavior. The INFJ, meanwhile, is learning to use their voice in ways they never have before. They're expressing their needs, their boundaries, and their expectations clearly and directly. This can feel strange and uncomfortable at first, but it's also incredibly liberating. They might start saying things like, "I can't help you with that right now," or "I need some time to myself," or "That doesn't work for me." These simple statements represent a fundamental shift in how they approach relationships and self-care. The guilt and liberation cycle. Setting boundaries for the first time brings up a complex mix of emotions for INFJs. On one hand, they feel guilty for not being as available and helpful as they used to be. This guilt can be intense because it challenges their core identity as a caring, selfless person. On the other hand, they experience an incredible sense of liberation. For the first time in their lives, they're prioritizing their own needs and well-being. They're discovering that they can say no without the world falling apart. They're learning that their worth isn't determined by how much they sacrifice for others. This cycle of guilt and liberation can be exhausting. INFJs might find themselves second-guessing their decisions, wondering if they're being too harsh or selfish. They might feel tempted to revert to their old patterns of people-pleasing. However, as they start to experience the benefits of healthy boundaries, better mental health, more authentic relationships, increased self-respect, the guilt gradually diminishes. They realize that taking care of themselves actually makes them better able to care for others in healthy ways. The relationship purge. Quality over quantity. One of the most dramatic changes that occurs when INFJs have had enough is a complete overhaul of their social circle. They begin to evaluate all of their relationships through a new lens, asking themselves, is this relationship mutual? Does this person genuinely care about me? Do I feel valued and appreciated? Many relationships don't survive this scrutiny. INFJs realize that they've been maintaining friendships and family connections that are fundamentally one-sided. They've been giving their time, energy, and emotional support to people who wouldn't do the same for them. This relationship purge can be painful but necessary. INFJs would rather have a few authentic, mutually supportive relationships than dozens of superficial or draining ones. They're no longer willing to be someone's emotional dumping ground or perpetual helper without receiving genuine care and support in return. The people who remain in the INFJ's life after this purge are typically those who have shown consistent appreciation for the INFJ's efforts, who have reciprocated care and support, and who respect the INFJ's new boundaries. These relationships become deeper and more meaningful as a result. The self-discovery journey. When INFJs finally start prioritizing themselves, they often realize how little they actually knew about their own needs, wants, and desires. They've been so focused on others that they've neglected their own inner world and personal growth. This begins a journey of self-discovery that can be both exciting and challenging. INFJs start asking themselves questions like, what do I actually enjoy doing? What are my personal goals? What kind of life do I want to create for myself? They might discover new interests and hobbies that they never had time for before. They might pursue career changes or educational opportunities that align with their values and passions. They might even change their living situation or lifestyle to better reflect their authentic selves. This self-discovery process is crucial for INFJ's long-term mental health and happiness. They're learning to be their own best friend and advocate, rather than relying on others to define their worth and purpose. The new INFJ, compassionate but cautious. The INFJ who emerges from this transformation is still caring and empathetic, but they're also wiser and more self-protective. They've learned to distinguish between healthy helping and unhealthy people-pleasing. They understand the difference between being compassionate and being a doormat. This new version of the INFJ is still willing to help others, but they do so from a place of choice rather than obligation. They set clear boundaries about what they will and won't do, and they stick to them. They've learned to say no without feeling guilty and to prioritize their own well-being. They're also more selective about who they allow into their inner circle. They've learned to recognize the warning signs of toxic or one-sided relationships early on. They're no longer willing to give unlimited chances to people who consistently take advantage of their kindness. The ripple effect. How others react. When an INFJ undergoes this transformation, the people around them often have strong reactions. Some people are supportive and proud of the INFJ for finally standing up for themselves. They might say things like, "It's about time," or "I'm glad you're finally taking care of yourself." Others, particularly those who have been taking advantage of the INFJ's generosity, might react with anger or manipulation. They might accuse the INFJ of being selfish or claim that they've changed in a negative way. They might try to guilt-trip the INFJ back into their old patterns. Some people might be confused or hurt by the sudden change in the relationship dynamic. They might genuinely not have realized how one-sided the relationship had become, and they might be willing to work on creating a more balanced dynamic. The INFJ's response to these reactions is typically measured and firm. They're no longer willing to be manipulated or guilt-tripped back into unhealthy patterns. They maintain their boundaries regardless of how others react. Learning to receive. The hardest lesson. One of the most challenging aspects of this transformation for INFJs is learning to receive help, support, and care from others. They're so used to being the giver that accepting help feels foreign and uncomfortable. This difficulty stems from several factors. First, INFJs often feel like they're burdening others when they ask for help. They've internalized the belief that their problems aren't as important as other people's. Second, they worry about appearing weak or needy, which conflicts with their identity as the strong, supportive person in their relationships. Learning to receive is crucial for INFJs' continued growth and well-being. They need to understand that healthy relationships involve give and take, and that allowing others to support them actually strengthens the relationship rather than weakening it. This process often involves starting small, perhaps accepting a friend's offer to bring dinner when they're sick, or allowing a family member to help with a project. As they become more comfortable receiving support, they can gradually open up about bigger challenges and needs. The professional impact, INFJs in the workplace. The transformation that occurs when INFJs have had enough often extends to their professional lives as well. Many INFJs find themselves in helping professions, counseling, teaching, nursing, social work, where their natural empathy and desire to help others is valued. However, these same traits can make them vulnerable to burnout and exploitation in the workplace. They might take on extra responsibilities without additional compensation, work longer hours than necessary, or sacrifice their own well-being for their clients or students. When INFJs finally set boundaries in their professional lives, they often become more effective and satisfied in their careers. They learn to say no to unreasonable requests, to delegate appropriately, and to advocate for themselves in terms of workload and compensation. They might also make more dramatic changes, such as switching careers or starting their own businesses. Having learned to prioritize their own needs, they're no longer willing to stay in jobs that drain them or fail to align with their values. The long-term benefits. A healthier way of being. While the process of reaching the breaking point and rebuilding is painful, the long-term benefits for INFJs are substantial. They develop better mental and physical health as a result of reduced stress and improved self-care. They have more authentic and satisfying relationships with people who genuinely value and appreciate them. They also develop a stronger sense of self and personal identity. No longer defined solely by their ability to help others, they discover their own interests, goals, and dreams. They become more confident and assertive, while still maintaining their natural compassion and empathy. Perhaps most importantly, they learn to model healthy boundaries and self-care for others. By taking care of themselves, they show the people in their lives that it's okay to prioritize their own needs and well-being. Conclusion. The phoenix rises. When an INFJ finally says enough, it might look like destruction from the outside. Relationships end, patterns change, and the person others thought they knew seems to disappear. But what's really happening is a rebirth. A phoenix rising from the ashes of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice. The INFJ who emerges from this process is still caring, still empathetic, still deeply committed to helping others. But they're also self-aware, boundaried, and unwilling to sacrifice their own well-being for the sake of others' comfort. They've learned that they can't pour from an empty cup, and they've committed to keeping their own cup full. This transformation isn't easy, and it's not always pretty. It requires courage, self-reflection, and a willingness to disappoint some people. But for INFJs who have reached their breaking point, it's not optional, it's survival. If you're an INFJ who's struggling with these issues, know that it's okay to prioritize yourself. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say no. Your worth isn't determined by how much you sacrifice for others. You deserve to be cared for, appreciated, and supported just as much as anyone else. And if you have an INFJ in your life, take a moment to appreciate them. Let them know that you value their presence, not just their help. Check in on them, support them. Remember that even the strongest, most giving people need care and support too. The world needs healthy, boundaried INFJs, people who care deeply but also care for themselves. When INFJs finally say enough to unhealthy patterns, they're not just saving themselves, they're modeling a healthier way of being for everyone around them.